Around 3 months ago, my cousin, who is considering raising his kid outside of China, asked me, growing up in the US, were you ever bullied or were there any difficulties that you encountered? And I thought, well, that's a pretty good topic. So today I want to answer that question by sharing with you my story of growing up Chinese in white America. Now, I know that that's a strong title, but in elementary school, 70% of my classmates were in fact white. I didn't have another Chinese classmate until 7th grade, actually. And in college, one of my friends famously said that I was the whitest Asian he's ever met. So let's begin the story where it all started. When I was just over a year old, my parents and I moved from our home in Henan province in China all the way to the Chicago suburbs here in the US. Even though my parents were both college educated, neither of them spoke very good English though, so I did not speak any English with them. We only spoke Chinese at home, and because I didn't go to preschool or go to any clubs or anything like that, I didn't have any American friends, so I only spoke Chinese. Although I did watch some American television, and I do remember that some of my favorites were Blue's Clues, Dora the Explorer, Tom and Jerry. I doubt I really knew what was going on in them, but like Tom and Jerry, it's fun to watch, so I watched them. When I was 5 years old, I was finally ready to attend public school. And up until that point, my parents had not taught me any English because they said they didn't want me to learn their English with an accent. But they had to teach me a few phrases before I went to school, so they taught me how to say hello, thank you, good morning, and where is the bathroom? Now, I actually think it's pretty surprising just how adaptable kids are at that age. I actually remember being very excited to go to school, to meet my new American friends, and the first few years of school were actually just filled with good memories, and I don't even remember struggling on anything in particular. I also think that kids at that age are just so innocent and pure, like they have no concept of any of the differences or problems that plague society, like race or social economic class. However, throughout my elementary years, I still had my share of struggles. And so let's start with the original question. Was I ever bullied because of my race? Because I was Chinese and the minority. I honestly do not think that I was ever bullied directly because I was Chinese. But I will say that there was some name calling that were racially inspired. Kids would call me things like Ching Chong or Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, which keep in mind that I was the only East Asian kid at my school for many years, other than my sister. And figures like Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee were the Asian figures that kids knew about, so I guess it's natural to assume that they would make that connection. Later on in middle school and high school, because my last name is Wang, or as the Americans would pronounce, Wang, I got a lot of nicknames based off of that, like Wangarang or Wangamatang. But again, most of the people who called me those names were not actually out to get me. They did not have any bad intentions, and in fact, a lot of them were actually my closer friends. I actually just had one of my best friends from high school tell me like a month ago that in his phone contact list, I'm still Wangamatang. It did help that by middle school, I had already kind of built up a reputation. I became known as the smartest kid in school because I always got the highest test grades. So most kids respected me by then. But I have learned that overall, if you learn to respect yourself and you're comfortable with yourself, it really doesn't matter how everybody else treats you. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where the way you see yourself becomes the way other people see you. And I think that's so important in this day and age whenever we talk about racial problems. I don't want to make anyone mad, but honestly, from my own experience, I can say that the way you see yourself really does become your reality. If you think the world is out to get you, then the world will be out to get you. If you think that the world is on your side, then the world will be in fact on your side. But the biggest struggle with growing up as the minority is this longing to fit in. I mean, as kids, we just want to be a part of the group. We want to be accepted. And when we're different from the group, we change ourselves to become more like the group. I mean, that's probably why my friend says that I seem whitewashed, because throughout my childhood, I hung around white people. I remember when people would talk about their favorite celebrities, about their idols or the movie stars, and I wouldn't know any of them because I didn't know anything about pop culture. I didn't listen to pop music, and we didn't go to the movies. I remember students and teachers debating on whether the Chicago Sox or the Cubs were the better baseball team, and I didn't know anything about that because I didn't watch baseball. When they asked me which team I liked better, I just made it up. I eventually decided that I would be a Sox fan for no apparent reason. And I remember that everybody was either in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, and I didn't join any of those organizations either, so I couldn't relate. This became kind of like the theme of my childhood, where I always felt like the world that I was living in was slightly different than the world that they were living in. And I'll be honest, I was never super proud to be Chinese. I didn't despise it either, but all I wanted was just to be another American kid. You know, when my parents would force us to learn Chinese, I didn't want to practice my Hanzi. I didn't really want anything to do with Chinese culture, and I definitely didn't consume any Chinese media, unless you count Jackie Chan movies. But everybody watched Jackie Chan movies, and most of his movies were in English, so that doesn't even really count. The big turning point for me was when we went back to China for the first time since we came to the US, and that was when I was 15 years old. It was a long time because there were some complications, but the first time I went back, I just suddenly realized that there's a world much bigger outside of the US, and there were way more people just like me, and that was also the first time I met my extended family. A few years later, we went back to China for the second time, and it was in that trip that I was just really impressed with some of the technology that they have over there, especially bullet trains and cashless payments, which, if you don't know about China's bullet trains, they go like 180 miles an hour. It's the coolest thing ever. It makes Amtrak seem like a dinosaur. And cashless payment, how cool is that? You walk around without a wallet. To pay someone, you just scan their QR code with your cell phone. But those experiences completely destroyed the narrative that I've kind of been fed my whole life, that the US is somehow the greatest country in the world and we're better than everybody else at pretty much everything. It was also in that trip that I started to realize that my limited Chinese language skills were kind of hindering me from truly immersing myself into the culture. So that was also when I started getting more interested in learning Chinese again. Now I know I'm not the only one who's experienced these things or feels this way. There's a lot of Chinese immigrants or children of immigrants who've grown up in the US, in Canada, Australia, Europe, or the rest of the world, who spent their childhoods conforming to the local culture. And my original inspiration for starting this channel, actually, AB Chinese, was to help fellow ABCs and to inspire them to learn their native language and to appreciate their culture instead of rejecting it. And this is especially important for Americans, not just Chinese Americans, but I've come to believe that everybody should learn a foreign language and a foreign culture, because it allows you to see things and issues from two different perspectives at least. And let's face it, Americans tend to be a bit more narrow-minded when it comes to global affairs. Especially, if you consider the recent events in like the last year or two between the US and China, it's given me personally an opportunity to really see issues from both the American side of things and also from the Chinese side of things. And when you start seeing things from both sides, you start to realize that neither side is as bad as the other side makes them out to be. And wouldn't the world be a better place if people could just see things from each other's perspective instead of attacking each other? I really believe that if America and China can coexist harmoniously, not just the governments, but the people to mutually respect each other, then we would live in probably the most prosperous time the world has ever seen. So if I can influence that somehow to help make that a reality, I would gladly do it. So that might be something I consider for the future of this channel, to help Americans appreciate Chinese culture and help Chinese people appreciate American culture. So looking back at my childhood, it was honestly kind of lonely, but I imagine it must have been even lonelier for my parents. I mean, there were a lot of people that were good to me, but I always felt like I didn't completely fit in. As bad as it sounds to want a friend or to choose your friends based on race alone, there are just some things that you can't really understand or relate to unless you've lived through it. Like, I have some really good, white American friends, but none of them are going to know what it feels like to be completely oblivious to pop culture and entertainment, to have this pressure to just study and do well in school, become a doctor or an engineer one day, not being allowed to do sleepovers or playing an instrument instead of watching baseball. To this day, one of my regrets is not having even one good Chinese American friend growing up. Just somebody that I could relate to, somebody who knew the struggles of being an immigrant or the nuances of an Asian family. But I guess life is too short for regrets, and the only thing we can change is the future. 所以，对于想出国的朋友们，我今天呢能给你们的结论就是这样的：出国也好，美国的确是很好的国家。不过， 以我来看，生活中最重要的事也不是物质上的生活条件，而是身边的人。能有个真正贴心理解你的朋友，应该比钱能买的物质东西都要更珍贵的多。如果孩子要在国外长大的话，也希望他们会有这样的朋友。当然，第一代移民总是不容易的，父母也是希望孩子好，孩子也总是会理解父母的心，会感谢你们的。今天就说到这了，希望本视频对大家有帮助，咱们下次再聊吧，再见了，拜拜。